Come meet me at the Museo with Alan and Daniel. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. Everyone come gather round, listen to your favorite sound. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We'll talk the games and all the rest, about the team that we love best. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We're gonna talk about the Cardinals all night long.
And good evening, and welcome into another edition of Meet Me at Mutual. I'm your host, Dana Shoptaw, C70 at the bat, at C70 on Twitter. And with me, as almost always, but back in the saddle after a couple of weeks, is Mr. Coach Alan Medlock. Red Dirt Redbird A Medlock 1 on Twitter. We've got Alan back after some of the new jobs responsibilities. And Alan, it's just good to have you back on the show for a while.
Oh, absolutely, buddy. I'm excited. I've been looking forward to it all day. Had some dreary weather, but I'm ready to talk some early hot stove and ready to get back on it.
Well, we've had 2 weeks. Like I said, it happened to be 2 weeks that were kind of important. Not to have you on, because the Cardinals, of course, get rid of Mike Shildt. Before we get into the new manager, because that happened this week, you haven't really had a chance. Give us your take on what you thought about the firing of Shildt and what all went down around that.
Well, it's crazy. When the news broke, and I remember you and I were going back and forth after Rob broke those news, and I thought, man, this is an odd situation. It doesn't seem like an organization that would be like, hey, our way or the highway type situation, but it seemed like that probably had a lot to do with it. I was a Shildt apologist on here. I really liked him. I kind of felt like he was groomed for the position. It's funny. I wish I had kept better records on things that we had written back in the Redbird Daily days, because I had actually written about that. Whenever Shildt was named the bench coach for Matheny, I thought, well, this is a situation where they're going to elevate Shildt pretty quickly. Right. And I kind of felt all along that may have been kind of the situation with Marmol as well. And it was funny, through the text messages with a group of buddies between you and I and whatnot, I felt like Marmol probably played a bigger role in the managerial change than Shildt. I know that doesn't make much sense. And I realized that, yes, there was probably some differences, but I still think there was a lot of Ollie's getting a lot of attention from other teams. I'm sure there was probably quite a few requests to interview him, and that probably helped with those philosophical differences they talked about.
Yeah, I think that, obviously with Marmol being, named this week to the position, which didn't really surprise anybody. I think it just surprised us that they bothered to pretend like they were going to look at a managerial search. And I don't know that we got any reports of them actually doing a whole lot of interviewing. There's a lot of speculation about them talking to Schumacher. I don't know if anybody ever confirmed that they had or anything like that. I mean, it was pretty much Marmol from the beginning.
No, I agree. I completely agree with that. And sorry to cut you off. I feel like we're going to know a lot more of who they talk to whenever they finally name the staff. I don't know. I feel like more will leak whenever everything's in place. And that maybe some of that is due to, how should I say it? I'm sure there's probably some, what else can I do, Stubby Clap type stuff. You know what I mean? If there's any animosity there whatsoever. And I think that they'll probably wait to let some of that leak until the staff is fully in place.
Yeah, I mean, in some of that, you may even take a little bit of time. It may be that, if Stubby does hold a little bit of aggravation on that, it's not until next year when there's some opportunities that he jumps at something, maybe, who knows. And I don't know that he does. I mean, I don't want to indicate that he's going to have a problem because, again, just like you were saying, they put Schilt in the bench coach role and then elevated him. That's what they did with Marmol. So it's not necessarily a big surprise that he got the job. Now maybe there's a little bit more of hey, I should be the bench coach now. And if they do bring in a Skip Schumacher, like there's been some talk about, to be that job, then maybe that rubs some people the wrong way, or at least gets them looking for other opportunities. But you're kind of right. I mean, we'll see. And it's really interesting to me. I mean, they announced Marmol this week, which one also was a little bit surprising, right? I mean, they did it on an off day, but it was still during the postseason. A little bit surprising that they pulled the trigger like that. I just figured it would be like the day after the World Series or something like that. A little surprised that they did it so early, but and then I had to try. It's gone. It was the fact that they still talking about the staff, and they're still talking about that idea that everybody's supposed to be back or whatever, but they hadn't finalized all this stuff. And I kind of expected, honestly, when they announced Marmol that, maybe it was Mike Maddox isn't coming back, or a Stubby Clark, or somebody wouldn't be coming back in the staff. But at least right now, it sounds like they expect everybody to return, and then the addition of whatever bench coach they have.
Yeah. It's. I felt it was funny during the initial press conference or release, or however the Zoom meeting, whenever they fired Schilt, that they made so many comments about they expected everybody else to return. And then to lead to this, to where they haven't said anything, and this probably prompted, we've talked about this on every year we've done a show, how interesting a lot of that end of the season meetings, they turn out to be, probably more than any other organization. I don't know, but it's funny because the breakdown will say a lot, and the way that it has been handled, it raises more questions than anything. And you wonder how soon after the World Series are they going to announce the staff and then answer questions about who's coming back. So, it could be pretty crazy.
Yeah, it could be. It's just an interesting thing to watch. And you're right. Those meetings are always interesting. Obviously, we're very much so interesting this time. Mo in the press conference to hire Oli Marmol mentions that, one, he didn't expect to have a new manager this year, that even when he left Los Angeles, they did not have any indication that they were going to be making a change. And while he tried to, it's kind of funny, I think, to me, it's like, we realize we haven't really said a lot about this philosophical differences, so, we'll clear this up by saying there were internal issues. Well, I don't think that's a thing. But it really does sound like there was some sort of fissure that had started, and whatever they did in this, open forum type meetings, they either found out something they didn't like about what Mike Schilt had been doing, or there really was this idea of, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. And he said, I'm not going to do X, Y, and Z. And they said, well, we'll find somebody that can. I think you're right in the fact that if they didn't have Oli Marmol sitting right there, they might have been a little bit more hesitant to get rid of Mike Schilt, that they might have said, let's see if we can work this out. But with a guy that is, like you said, in such demand, and a guy that they have, they really kind of, it's honestly, there's a possibility they hired Mike Schilt just to kind of fill the gap until Oli Marmol was ready, and they just decided to push that readiness up a little early.
Sorry about that. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I wondered about that. I don't know. I felt like that was crazy, and you're exactly right. It went from, I didn't expect to hire a new manager, to this and this, to I have a feeling that phone call to fire Schilt was probably pretty eventful.
Yeah,
you could just kind of tell by the demeanor on both guys how they carried it, that phone call may not have been, safe for work, essentially. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That Schilt may have been the placeholder until Marmol was ready, and managerial stuff is so strange. And what's the likelihood that this situation is one where we think, oh, we should have saw that one coming? Or is it going to be the murky area this whole time? You know, if that's, I don't know if that question even makes sense. I just wonder. It's funny. Only our Buster Olney's tweet is what sets out my mind of there was rumblings in about mid-August that Schilt may have been in trouble. Now, was that before the winning streak and when they were still playing pretty poorly, or was there really legit questions of, hey, I'm not so certain this is copacetic?
Yeah, it's an interesting. I don't know that I saw that tweet, but that's an interesting thing to think about. Was a report like that? When you look at it in hindsight, there might have been something to it. At the time, you're right. It's kind of all the fans are grumping about him, so maybe that's what the front office is thinking.
Yeah,
which is not the way the Cardinals do things.
Sure,
but that doesn't mean that the national press necessarily understands that that's the way the Cardinals don't do things.
Yeah, we see that quite a bit, and that was kind of what I thought as well. I was like, well, is that kind of just jumping on board here, or is this? Did they really know that there was a split somewhere?
Yeah, and it would be very interesting. But then again, I mean, given the fact that Mo is talking about how he didn't expect to be changing managers, I have a feeling that anything that they were talking about in August was a little bit overblown. Like they may have known that there were issues and there were people that were butting heads, but I don't think that if the Cardinals miss the playoffs, that Mike Schilt necessarily loses his job. Now, obviously, in this situation, with the other issues on top of that, yes, but it's just it had to be something more than just the team not performing there for a while. So Marmol hired, again, not a big surprise. 35 years old, which is ridiculously young.
Yeah.
And younger than Adam Wainwright and Yadier Molina. And I thought Ollie addressed that pretty well and basically said, look, if you can do the job and you can care about your players and you are in a relationship with them, they don't necessarily care about your age. If you aren't doing your job, if you aren't putting your players first, if you aren't, if you don't have the thing in the clubhouse, it doesn't matter what your age is either. That doesn't really mean a lot. We'll see how well that works. I think it's probably true because I'm sure that he's got the support of guys like Wainwright and Molina, which goes a long way. I don't know that would be the case in every clubhouse, but I think it could work in St. Louis.
Yeah, without a doubt. You're probably right. That may be one of the few. I mean, if it was on the coast, this would be a bigger deal. I mean, and it's funny you bring up the age. I knew that he was young. I didn't realize he was that younger than 40. Whenever they named it, because it seems like he's been around for 10 years. That's and that's the strange thing about it. You're just like, wow. I mean, he got out of the game quick and went right into the managerial side or administration side of this too. It's pretty crazy, but I mean that just shows that if you feel like that, say if somebody walks up to you and you feel like they're a leader, they're pretty easy to follow. And that's I felt like they did that with Schilt as well.
Yeah, and I will say Marmol put himself out there very well. I think that I don't see any particular reason why players wouldn't want to play for him. I mean, there's going to be some. Some learning curves. There's going to be some, hey, he used to be my coach. Now he's my manager. There's a little bit different relationship there. There's going to be some adjustments on everybody's side. But, I don't think if the Cardinals don't make the playoffs next year, it's not because Ollie Marmol is the manager. I don't think. I think it's, I think he can do just as good of a job as Mike Schilt. He just doesn't necessarily have all that experience, but and I think that's what's going to be interesting, right? I mean, so often a guy like this would get some sort of grizzled veteran bench coach, right?
Yeah.
Like I don't know, like a Tony La Russa, or something like that.
Obviously not, I know what you mean, though.
Yeah, but I don't see that the Cardinals doing that because a guy like that is probably going to kind of kick against the goads of what the Cardinals organization is trying to do. I mean, that's kind of why we saw Mike Schilt leave. So, it feels to me like you're probably going to get a younger guy with a little bit less experience in that role again. And I guess it's not unheard of. I mean, Shield had more experience than Matheny, but he wasn't necessarily a major league veteran.
Yeah. So have you seen that Bob Melvin took the Padres job?
I saw that right before we started.
Okay. Which makes me wonder about Skip a little bit. But for some reason, I don't know why that it doesn't make sense. It just doesn't feel like a fit. If he was a legitimate manager candidate there, for them not to take him. I don't know. Somebody had thrown out Tingler, and for the longest time, I didn't have the best feeling on Tingler. I didn't feel like the Grand Slam saga, he handled it the best last year, and I didn't get a very good feeling about him. But I was listening to the the Hunter Pence podcast, and they were raving about him. But I don't think that that's necessarily the move that they would make either, to bring in a guy with just a few years of managerial experience and not necessarily the best. I don't know that I'm very curious to see the whole staff. I mean, that's kind of that cloud that's hanging over us right now, because I think it's going to be interesting when it comes out.
Yeah, I agree. I know there was some talk about, Tingler as the managerial candidate here, which did seem weird.
Yeah.
But, it's a situation where the Padres are a team that has embraced some of this analytical stuff that the Cardinals are trying to do. So bringing somebody over from that organization is not unheard of. Now, I think you'd probably try to rather bring somebody from the Dodgers or Tampa Bay or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's any of those guys available either.
Yeah. And you know what? And it's the Tingler move to me is the antithesis of Marmol, because he was essentially fired because he lost the clubhouse and underperformed this year, and wasn't the leader they expected him to be, where Marmol is being elevated because that's exactly what they wanted him to be. And it's just that I don't know why it just doesn't seem like it would seem like an odd fit to bring in Tingler with what we know about Marmol now.
Yeah. I honestly think, it's probably 95% chance that Stubby Clapp is the bench coach. And then they bring in a first base coach,
Sure.
And let somebody work up that way. Or maybe they promote a coach. I mean, the Cardinals have done a lot of this internal stuff that, they can promote somebody like, Ben Johnson from Memphis or somebody like that to be the first base coach. I don't know. It would be nice, I think. We've talked about this before, how the Cardinals don't necessarily have a whole lot of ideas coming from the outside. So it wouldn't hurt to have somebody that came in that just had a little bit different perspective of how to do things. And, maybe that's where, first base coach didn't necessarily have a whole lot of pull with what things are done, but they do have a way to input. And this is a team that is saying, at least, that they want this big collaboration between the front office and the staff and all this other stuff. So to get a guy in here that, at least has some experience from something else, couldn't be a bad thing.
Yeah. It goes back to how we had talked about and you'd written about they were a little too insular and they never looked outside. And that would be interesting. And you know what? I'm a little bit. One, I would be happy for Stubby Clapp if he gets the gig. And it would. I feel like it would, to be able to mesh all those things together, I think would be a testament to the front office. I would like to see that happen. In the back of my mind, I'm thinking I would love to see a Oquendo type or a Pendleton type, or one of those guys back in the dugout, and you would see McGee stay and stuff like that. In a situation like that, I feel like Clapp's the next in line, and that's kind of like how Schilt was. So I don't know. It's right. I always think, well, it just looked weird to have those guys in the dugout, but I've gotten rather used to Mike Maddox in the dugout by now.
Yeah. I mean, seeing a new face would take a little bit of time, but yeah, I think it's probably, like I said, you probably do Stubby. You probably don't have a lot of changes, but it feels like at some point in time, and that's kind of why I thought this might be. I think Ben and I may have talked about this 2 weeks ago. This idea of Jeff Albert is over the hitting staff, and Marmol has said, "Hey, I'm on board with what Jeff Albert's doing. We may have to tinker the message, but I'm on board with what he's doing." It feels like it's getting real close to time for the Cardinals to do something like that on the pitching side, to get a guy that's maybe the major league pitching coach that is in charge of philosophy throughout up and down the organization. And it kind of feels like this would have been the time to do that. I don't know what Mike Maddox's contract situation is. I keep trying to search for it. I can't ever figure out if he's got another year or so on his contract. I'm guessing he probably does. But, it feels like this would be a time where they could go, and start that procedure as well. And maybe they want to get a little bit more a footing on their, on the hitting side before they do this pitching wise. But eventually, I can't believe that they're not going to have some sort of pitching coordinator, if you will, that's in charge of the philosophy from top up, all the way down to the bottom. And so there can be that consistency all the way up and down, just like they're doing on the hitting side.
Yeah. It's especially all the talks all the things we've heard about the lab in Jupiter and all that jazz that we've heard for years that, I would say, well, it still hadn't happened, but we also had the pandemic year and you just never know how much that played a part. But, that makes a lot of sense. I had not thought about that, about how there's going to come a time where they're going to have to go top to bottom, just a full ideology. And that would have made a lot of sense. It begs the question of why Carpenter got away so easy. You know what I mean? Is that part of it? Are they going to go from ground zero to build something, or is it just year to year with what they have now?
I don't know. I do know that Kyle Boddy, who's from Driveline, his agreement with the Reds, they broke that off.
Yeah,
he's not working for the Reds anymore, and that's the guy that I would like to see the Cardinals. He's not like a pitching coach. I don't think you make him the pitching coach, but put him in charge of everything, and see what you can do. Because I think he's had a whole lot of success. Although maybe not as much with the Reds, but you can only do so much with what you have and where that ballpark is. I think that's something like that. But at some point in time, I think they're going to have to do that, because we're not seeing the minor league pitching like we used to. I mean, granted, a lot of that's because of the trades that have been made. But, they went through so many arms this year, and there's not anybody that's, just ready to make that next step. So maybe Liberatore. I know Zach Thompson's having a good Arizona Fall League, but I feel like he's still got some time. It doesn't feel like there's that depth that we've known before. And it may just take somebody to kind of get everybody in line and take that next step in development there.
Yeah. And it's so funny how the game has gone to that. It's almost like, I don't even know how to say it. There's so much behind the scenes work that it's almost like a foreign language to learn it. You know what I mean? The programming stuff and it's pretty crazy the way the game's trending right now. And when you see Zaidi succeed like he did this year, I think that kind of ramps it up a little bit for everybody else.
Yeah. I mean, it's just like 20 plus years ago when Billy Beane started drafting people that walk.
Yeah.
And then that was successful. Everybody started doing that, and it changed the game. And it feels like this is what we're doing right now is getting into that next evolution of sabermetrics.
Yeah, and it's funny, even on the gameplay side of this. I mean, I talk about this all the time, that where I loved the playoff series back in the 80s and early 90s, where your horse went game 1, 4, and 7. That's just how it worked, and you fit in around that. Well, now they bullpen 2 of 5, and it's completely crazy how things have changed.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if the Dodgers had some of those issues this year and it blew up on them. We'll see.
Well, yeah, I mean, I never want to see anybody get hurt, but the way that I look at how the Dodgers did is they got a little too cute with their pitching, and they ran out of gas completely with Urias and Max. So hopefully that kind of trends back a little bit, but I don't know. I think you may see the Braves win a World Series with only 2 starters.
Yeah, that's a possibility. I don't know. That's the game is always changing. And
Yeah.
it's always evolving. I mean, watching some of these videos, like because it's this time of year, right? It's 25 years ago today or 30 years ago today, something happened because
Yeah.
it's World Series. It's always World Series going on. And so I guess it was a few days ago they had the Game 6 for the Mets where Mookie Wilson hits the ball at the line. And you look at the players from that, and of course you can watch those Cardinals teams from the '87 and '85 and all that kind of stuff. Those guys, are like toothpick. I mean, they look like a guy that works with you out at the at the plant or whatever the case. They didn't look like what we now think of as professional ball players. I mean, they don't have that look to them. And the game has changed. The game has gotten into weightlifting and figuring out how to become stronger, and and the money's in that, it helps in that regard too. But so it's always going to change, and you just got to be willing to do that, and you want to be on one of the ones that's kind of on the forefront. And I don't think the Cardinals have let this get past them a little bit. They've talked about it a lot. They've talked about the kinetic chain for years. They had that, man, they even had that artist or something for a while that was supposed to be like drawing the players and trying to, to see how they were, mechanically and stuff like that. And they've tried to do some stuff, but they've not been at the front lines of it like Tampa Bay and like the Dodgers and things of that nature. They're trying to catch up, and it's going to be interesting to see if they're going to be able to do that.
Yeah, I agree. And that's, I don't know why I say this every year, but I feel like they've dimmed a little bit. Just because the fact that they're showing that they're kind of in that A's mode to where they're going to win 90 to 100, but they can't get anywhere past that. And, they were in the World Series last year, and you're already starting to hear that. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's ever evolving, which is interesting, and it's awesome. That's the beauty of baseball. And it's just funny. Whenever we have these conversations, I think back to the time that we had that meeting to where he had said that they felt like they were being passed up in innovation, and that was going to be Mo's job. And they were going to start bailing from the top, and then they bring in Albert, and like you said, they're probably going to bring in a new pitching coordinator somewhere down the line. And we think so. We think, not we as in you and I, but the Cardinal fan base thinks Gersh doesn't do anything, but he was requested by the Mets, as was everybody else. But they're obviously doing something right. It's just going to take that next step to get over to kind of win over just about everybody.
Yeah, I think I just got a call from the Mets. Hang on.
Man, what a weird deal. What a weird situation.
And I mean, it's a tough. I mean, granted, it's a huge media market, so you're getting into that mess. You've got an owner that's very hands-on and not necessarily steeped in baseball.
Yeah.
I think Cohen could be a good owner. Coming off of the Wilpons, he's definitely going to be better than them.
Yeah.
But you do have that, and then you have a whole situation where you don't know who else is going to be there and how long, and it feels like anybody they hire then gets arrested. So.
No, you feel. I know that they're going to bring in a new front office guy, but I feel like Beltran gets that managerial job.
That's an interesting idea. I hadn't really thought about that, but it would make some sense.
With Cora playing his cards right, with Hinch, seemingly being forgiven, with the Astros back in the series. I don't know. I just feel like Beltran gets another shot at that.
I think that's fair. I think right now it feels like Beltran's the one that's been punished the most, and it does sound like he might have had a fairly active role in this. So it's not like it's necessarily unjust, but it does feel like some have had more involvement and had less punishment. So maybe so. I mean, you're right. If Cora and Hinch especially can get back into baseball like within a year, and Cora with exactly the same team. I mean, that's like the Michael Jordan to the White Sox type of thing, So if they can do that, I don't see why they wouldn't look at Beltran if they liked him. I mean, again, everybody is different than they were when he got that, 3 or 4 years ago when he actually had that job. So there may be not necessarily the people that are fond of him or thought about him beforehand. Those dogs.
They do not agree with this Beltran move, I can tell you.
some sort of possum outside or something.
Yeah.
But anyway, so yeah, that'd be interesting. I think that's fair. I haven't seen anything tied to that, but I don't think I've seen anything tied to the front office, or they're looking at the front office guys and then they get to the manager part. I've not seen a whole lot of names tied to that. Yeah. So, it is interesting. And I saw somebody point out that, Schilt was a guy that was looked at for San Diego. He might fit even better in Oakland.
Yeah.
Depending on what these philosophical differences are, because again, it's a situation where Oakland has been fairly advanced in some of these analytical stuff. But if that's depending on what those differences were, it would seem like that's a great place for him, lesser media and stuff like that. Does that make sense to you?
Sure. And it was funny. I hadn't thought about that backfill, because I was going to ask you the question that is, does Schilt go in and does he fit in a player development role behind the scenes a little bit if this Padres job gets filled, by going with Melvin? But then I thought about that. I was like, well, yeah, the Oakland job is available. And my first reaction always goes back to Ron Washington, just because I feel like the spotlight's on him, especially with Atlanta playing the way that they are, that he's going to get another shot somewhere in the American League West where he's been before, in particular Oakland. Makes a lot of sense. But somebody like Schilt would, being successful and shown that he has worked the front office before, and it sounds like Bean will be staying, and maybe there is some connection there. Now, I'm not sure. That would seem to be a good play, I would think, for the A's.
Yeah. Does Schilt go back to the minor leagues if that somebody comes up to him and says, "Hey, we want you to manage our AAA team"? Would he rather do that than sit out of baseball? Because part of me feels like he's really tied to being in baseball somewhere, and he's done the minor league thing before.
Yeah, I could see that. I could see him being a roving instructor for somebody, to where it's just not the same bus ride, schedule of a AAA team. I could see that. I mean, I fully think that he's going to be back in baseball next year. I mean, I have very little doubt that that's going to happen in some capacity like that, and in a farm director type role, that does make sense.
Yeah, or on somebody's coaching staff, even if he doesn't have a top job, because we know he can get people. He can turn the team around. I mean, at least in the fundamentals. So if if you need that would work for him. Let's shift gears a little bit. The other thing, got news today were the finalists for the Gold Glove Awards, and whatever you believe of the Gold Gloves, which is probably fair, it is still nice to see. When the Cardinals are in the mix for those. It's a little bit weird. I'm still not quite adjusted to this whole, finalist thing, and that they announced 3 guys and then they'll announce the awards later on. Back in our day, you just kind of got all the awards at one time, and not always was it more than a press release. But Cardinals had 6 different guys as a finalist for the Gold Glove, and 6 out of 9, you can't really complain about that if you've got guys and shortstop. They between the split between DeYoung and Sosa, neither one of those guys probably really available or eligible, and Carlson maybe could have been in that mix, but they pretty much kind of maxed out what they could do, and that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, we knew they were a good defensive team. I was guessing 5 finalists. And I think they may win 5. Unfortunately, I didn't really think about Edman until he came out today. So that's going to be interesting. Don't you think that they'll have the double in the outfield? Well, if they had the double in the outfield, I would think that Arenado and Goldschmidt are locks too. So
I think
so you think that would be the 4?
Yeah, because I think I was very much like you, very surprised at Edman. I don't see him beating out Colton Wong.
No.
And then I think Yadi's was a little bit of name recognition, a little bit of, I don't know how many catchers were actually, eligible to some degree who play enough back there as other teams kind of split their stuff. Not that Yadi was bad, but he definitely wasn't as defensively swift as he's been. So and he hasn't won it in a couple of years now. So I think it would take something specific, really like a really good year for him to jump back into it. So I think the corners, and I think they get both outfields, but I don't think they get Edman or Molina.
Yeah, that would be my guess if we did it. Now, who is the third catcher with Molina and Stallings? I know I can't think of it either.
It was Real Muto, I think.
Oh, okay. Yeah, he'll probably win it. I was thinking this could be the year a guy like Stallings could win, but I don't know. Yeah. I bet it's JT.
Yeah, it's last year they did the Gold Gloves completely by statistics, just because of the weirdness that was 2020. I don't know how much that plays into it this year, if it's all the voting like it used to be with the players and such, in which case, reputation does mean a lot. Stallings would seem to be a kind of a guy that could be on the up and comer, but you're right. If it's got anything to do with name recognition, he has a tough road to hoe. Now, it does look like this year it is back to the managers and up to 6 coaches. So it's back to, and so that could be an issue for, that might help Yachty. It would probably help him more if he hadn't said he's coming back next year. He might win one next year just as a going away present, but I don't know. It's going to be interesting because I think there's a lot of good opportunities for the Cardinals, and there's a lot of good players overall. Though I mean, I would be, like I said, if Edman won. Edman had a nice year at second base, but I don't think it was necessarily the best out there ever.
No. I mean, I was surprised. Completely when the news broke this afternoon, and I was like, oh, interesting. That's pretty awesome. We knew that they defended almost like no other, and it kind of shows. But yeah, that one kind of caught me off guard.
Yeah, if they had a team award, they would definitely be.
Yeah, it's crazy.
In for that. So, but yeah, and I'm like I said, I didn't expect Dylan Carlson to, because he had a little bit of struggles early on. But I think one of these years he's probably at least a finalist. As he continues to get his, feet wet, as you will, in the major leagues. I mean, we saw that play again he made against the Padres, right, crashing into the wall.
Yeah.
I think he can make plays like that on a regular basis too. So.
No, I agree, and it's it's funny. I wonder how much if they, I know they go by how they. They went back to the traditional way of doing this instead of just breaking it down through the analytical side of it. I think he was probably hurt by playing center a little bit. I think the longer he stays in right field, I think his chances go up considerably.
Well, and he's also probably hurt, just to be fair, by the fact that O'Neill and Bader were so good.
Yeah, that's true.
If you're voting on this stuff, you're like, well, I got to vote for O'Neill and I got to vote for Bader, but I can't vote for the whole Cardinal outfield. I got to, take it off somewhere. And I think that might have hurt him a little bit too. Is that some people might have been like, hey, he's good, but I can't, these guys are better, and I got to give some love to somebody else. So, we'll see how that works out, but it was interesting to see that. And it's, like I said, the Cardinals are a team that have won the most Gold Gloves in their history, and had the most nominees this time around. So that is the Cardinals' DNA, if you will, and it's good to see them back to that.
Yeah, without a doubt, and it's that I don't think that we'll probably see any kind of dip. But that was one concern that I have, is the difference that Shildt made on that in the base running.
Yeah. I think Marmol made a point to note how much in both those things, and how I think their intent is at least to try to keep that up. They're not just going to let it go. I think they know how much work it took, and so hopefully that's the case. So. To kind of, I know we're at about the 40-minute mark, but this may take a bit. And so I'm going to say, to wrap this up, there was, as I said earlier, this time of year, there's always, milestones in histories and things of that nature. And tonight is the 10th anniversary of the Cardinals winning the 2011 World Series. In fact, this time This time 10 years ago, they're probably in the third or fourth inning when
Yeah.
it was kind of trying to make it through the rest of the way. So that means that 10 years from tomorrow, it's over a decade since the Cardinals have won a World Series.
Mm-hmm.
We often talk about the DeWitt era as a success, and it is. I mean, but we look at this from '96 on, and we look at how successful the Cardinals have been, and 2 titles and all that kind of stuff. If you were going to narrow that window down to the day after, 10 years ago tomorrow to today, how successful is that last 10 years? They have a World Series appearance. They went to the playoffs 7 times, I think, out of that. But they also had a lot of, they lost in the first, the playoff game this year. They lost in the first round last year. They had that, flame out against the Nationals in 19. How do you judge the last 10 years?
I would rather be a Cardinals fan than a Mariners fan.
Well, that's true. That is very true.
I mean, to me, that's successful. I mean, that's you get beat by 2. The team that beat you in 2 NLCS win the World Series. You and the Giants.
Yeah.
You make it to a World Series you probably feel like you should probably beat the Red Sox at that, but you did make the World Series. And you had the 3 years without the playoffs, and you're right back in it with an NLCS appearance. So I don't know. It's tough for me to not say that that's not a great run.
And I guess that's probably not the best question to ask, because it is. I mean, you look at that, but you also look at it as, I don't know, maybe not as great as it could have been. I mean, again, you have those 3 years that really kind of stand out. You have the whole Matheny era, which had playoff appearances, but also had a lot of frustrations in them. You have that 2015 team that felt like it should have done a lot more than lose to the Cubs in 3. I mean, you have a playoff series lost to the Cubs in that span. That's terrible. that goes really far on one way to the scale when you're losing to the Cubs. But so I'm not saying that it's not.
No,
I don't want to get that. But you just start thinking about it, and you start thinking it's definitely, if you took that 10 years and compared it to the 10 years before, which is better? I mean, the 10 years before has 2 World Series, but it has 2 or 3 years out of the playoffs. Because that's what 2001 to 2011, or I guess technically 2002 to 2011. So that's got, you're out of it in 03. You've got the flame, you do have a series in 04. You have a series in 06. You have a series in 11. You're out of the World Series in 10. You have that playoff loss in 09, out of the playoffs in 08. What would you do? I mean, between those two, it's kind of a, I mean, again, you're right. It's better. Either one of those are like ideal for teams like Pittsburgh or Seattle, or even, heck, the last 10 years, the Yankees would probably take the Cardinals.
That's true.
Yeah. But what if you had to compare those 2 decades? Where would you go?
It's going to be hard to go against 2 World Series titles.
Mm-hmm.
So the early would probably be for me, but it's still, I don't know. I just feel like we're the spoiled fan when we break these down a little bit. I mean, it's pretty tough, but that's just what we do. So I don't know. I mean, and it's funny when we talk about. I understand the Mo frustration, and I am a believer in message growing stale, and I do think that they're a believer in that as well. And I think that's why they try to promote Gersh to do the things that he does. Why Mo can do the things that he does in development and still address the media like he does. And I think that those changes are to avoid becoming stale. But I think that there's plenty out there, and there may be enough evidence to show that maybe things do need to change just a little bit. I'm not sure, but it's tough to argue with the track record overall.
No, that's absolutely true. I mean, the idea that John Mozeliak has been a failure would be a terrible position to try to stake out. I know that some people tend to argue that he has been less successful as of late. I don't know. Maybe you could make that case a little bit more, but again, the only way we can judge managers and general managers is how the team does at the end of the day, to some degree. And that's, to some degree, not necessarily fair, because even if the general manager or the manager does the right things, the team might not win. It might just be, run into a better team or whatever. But, if that's the case, John Mozeliak's had his team in the playoffs the last 3 years. They haven't, won division title out of that too. It's not just been sneaking in. They've got it, they've been successful. So I don't know. It's just kind of interesting to me that when you look at this last 10 and, again, no World Series, which, they didn't, this 10 years is much better than the 90s. Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, all you had in the 90s was Mark McGwire, and that 96 team, I guess. So it granted, you're right. It is, and it comes from a place of privilege and spoiling, but it is just kind of interesting to kind of compare and look at a decade like that, because it's, hard to believe that it's been 10 years. I know that's what I put up on Twitter. It's like, why is everybody saying this has been 10 years? This was like 3 weeks ago. I mean, it doesn't feel like a whole decade since David Freese became David Freese.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I was like, let me just look up World Series champions just to see the time between and whatnot. And here's my thing: do we make it another 15 years before they go back to a World Series? That would be the distance between 87 to 2004. Yeah.
Yeah, no, they're not going to go. Well,
I know it's tough to say. I mean, because you see some of the the teams that you feel like are going to make a pretty serious run on it, and I don't know. It's tough.
I think that the Cardinals would feel, especially with Paul Goldschmidt and if they're not in the World Series in the next 5 years, they're in trouble.
Yeah.
To some degree, because they've put a lot of eggs in those guys' baskets. And I know they've got some young talent coming up and stuff like that. But if they can't get a title with those two guys, then I don't know. And again, I know that they're getting older and that baseball is a situation where
it's just how the ball bounces sometimes.
Right.
Yeah.
But if nothing else, they should have a World Series capable team.
Yeah.
Over the next 5 years. And right now, you can make that argument they don't have that. Which is, kind of gets us into maybe what they should do this winter, depending on what their money situation, there's enough money to do some things, obviously. What would it take, do you think, for this team to be a World Series capable team come March?
I think that you will probably have to get, and I'm not saying going and getting one of the top shortstops, but I think that you probably need, I think that the game has shown in the World Series in particular, definitely in the NLCS, that you have to have depth and you have to have guys that can play at a moment's notice. I think that they're going to have to add, if not one, if not two guys that could be MLB-ready players that are that just short of stars to fill out the roster. I don't think they can roll the same bench out. And I think that you can get one starter, one significant starter, and I think that you would be the class of the Central. And at that point, I think that you're probably one of the best in baseball. It's one of those. It's the thing that in my mind this whole time is I keep thinking that the Braves are in the World Series and they could be better next year. Injuries really affected them, and then the gamble on who they went and picked up at the deadline, which leads me to something else. The gamble they took at the deadline is what put them over the top. they are going to have to be aggressive at the deadline at some point. They're going to say they were this year, but this year was one of those, hey, we're going to roll the dice and see if this works. And it did.
And it was to get through the season.
Yeah, it was out of necessity, not necessarily out of I don't want to say will, but I think we're on the same page on that.
Yeah.
And I think that that will be some of the things that I think they'll have to do. I think that you can expect a season similar to what Arenado had this year. I think that your outfield has kind of established itself to where you're probably not going to you may not have an MVP type season again out of O'Neill, but I think that you could see now that their patience is kind of paying off on that. And we haven't seen the best of Carlson yet either. I think that you're going to have to get some depth, and I think that you're going to have to I think you're going to have to fortify that rotation a little bit more. And I think that you could see now that teams can win with a large number of pitchers in the way that they handle the minimal times through the lineup. And I think you can be creative, and I think that you're closer to being really, really good than you were a year ago.
And to be fair, we talked about it. I think if they get past the Dodgers this year, they had as good a chance to get to the World Series.
No, I agree. I completely agree.
Maybe I underrated the Giants, but the Cardinals did go 4 out of 4 and 2 against them this year. And then you're looking at apparently Atlanta, and that might have been a problem too. There's always. I'm not saying that they would have been favored in by any stretch, but I think you could see a path to where they could get there this year.
Yeah. Look you're right. Anything could happen. Rosario was traded in his down year when he was hurt and has done the things that he's done. Those things can happen. You never know. That could have happened with the Cardinals. Look, we didn't see – I know time was limited, but Flaherty starts one of those 5 games, don't you think?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
probably.
And you never know how that goes.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the kicker right there for next year is if Jack Flaherty can stay healthy, which I don't think we have any indication that he can't. He had a bad year in that part this year, but there's, if he stays healthy and you get a number 2 or number 3 starter, and then you have Adam Wainwright, and then, then you have a Miles Michaelis as a 4 and, whatever you can do in that 5th spot. You don't have to revamp your whole starting lineup. One good pitcher can make an impact right there. Just kind of like they would, with one good, putting Trevor Story in that lineup.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the name that keeps popping out to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of, there's an interesting article about Story in The Athletic this week about, how he kind of seems to have already, mentally left Colorado. And he said something about wanting, what was it? It was, of course the money was a big part of it, obviously, but it was also, geography. It was tradition clubhouse and winning basically. And it was something where I looked at that and I was like, his geography is, I think he's from Texas. St. Louis is not bad off of that.
Yeah.
St. Louis checked all his boxes.
Yeah, exactly.
Doesn't mean other teams won't, and it doesn't mean that they will give the money that other teams will. Because especially the Rangers may be a big play for them. But you could see that, and I think we've talked a lot about Corey Seager or even Carlos Correa. I'm not going to say that they would not be great in St. Louis because they probably would be, but for some reason, Story feels like a better. It just feels like the fit that would work the best in St. Louis.
Yeah.
Maybe that's some of that Arenado leftover haze or something, but it just feels like from what we know of Trevor Story, he would fit in with this clubhouse. Maybe better than the others. Correa, of course, obviously comes with his own baggage. And Seager's probably going to be too expensive, but Story seems to make some sense there.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. It's the top 2 are going to price themselves out. Correa is going to make a lot of money, and then until we looked at it a couple of weeks ago, I was thinking that Seager probably wouldn't make what yeah, I think he's going to make a ton. And it's one of those. I think they press themselves out. As far as a left-handed bat and all that, I think that Seager would be a pretty good fit. I think you have a little bit of redundancy with Story, but I think Trevor Story is what they wanted Paul DeJong to become, and I think that this has kind of fell into their lap a little bit to where they may have to make that move. And in the back of my mind, I keep thinking, well, what does that do with Gorman coming? And I know we have all off season to break that stuff down, but I do think that would be the move that they would make if they were to make the big splash. Would be Story.
Yeah, you're right. You said that about Paul DeJong, and I think I remember, his rookie year, there was that comparison, right? That he wasn't Trevor Story, but he was kind of, the generic brand of him, if you will.
Yeah.
And it obviously hasn't necessarily stayed that way, but I think if there weren't any big shortstops out there, if there were only one big shortstop out there, the Cardinals would be fine to try to figure out some sort of playing time between Sosa and DeJong. But with four, kind of franchise altering guys, and I really don't think they're going to go after a guy like Javi Baez. So
yeah,
but still,
yeah,
somebody will. And to have a chance to get a guy that can be another cornerstone, and a guy that they've gone out and gotten cornerstones in Goldschmidt and Arenado, but if they went and got a Story, he'd be like 2 or 3 years younger than those guys when they got him, and that's a big deal, to get somebody that's kind of starting or more in the middle of their prime than getting closer to the end. Makes a big difference. Yeah,
and it's you're right about that. It just, in the back of my mind, I keep thinking the same thing. Is they could probably play it safe, but it does feel like that these guys staring right in their face, they're going to need to probably do something. So yeah, I don't know. I kind of feel that way. The Gorman thing is the one that is just in the back of my mind, to where I feel like when he plays, he's going to play every day. And I don't know. I thought an interesting article out of Seattle was just a blog post about their interest in, say, Tommy Edman, and you wonder if that would be a sell high type situation. I don't know.
Boy, I tell you, I think if you could get, there are not a whole lot of guys on the Cardinals that could sell high.
Yeah,
that you'd want to sell high on. I mean, you could trade Tyler O'Neill, but why would you want to? Right?
Yeah.
But if you could trade Tommy Edman and get something of value back, I think you'd have to do it. As much as it would be nice to have that versatility off the bench, if Gorman is coming to play second base, which it looks like he is, and it looks like it won't be very long, I think you do that.
Yeah,
I don't see how you don't. I just don't know what kind of market that is.
Well, and you know what? Something that I hadn't thought about. I mean, there was Rosario and Soler have let off a lot of the times for the Braves. So you do wonder if Marmol is one of the guys that may look at some sort of lineup like that, to where, let's say you do get a Trevor Story, if he's not your leadoff guy. And, you look at something like that. I mean, it's the Braves lineup, in game, did it go? Yeah, it went Soler, Freeman, and Albies, which seems pretty inverted to me, when you look at 80s and 90s baseball to being pretty successful. So you do wonder if something like that, at the likelihood of these moves happening, may go down, may raise or elevate, because the game has changed that much to where you don't have to have your prototypical leadoff hitter.